in Uganda, in the continent. Unfortunately, it is not getting of children for the last 15, 16 years. And you get to a point where you ask yourself, what are we not getting right? And I was involved a lot in implementation of programs. And that is part of the reason why I've gravitated more towards research now. And what we are trying to do is exactly to answer that question, to address that particular issue on what is it that we are not getting right. Because, as you rightly said, we have more children on the street at the moment. We have the issues of violence against children are up. We have a lot of children facing abuse. And so we think that one of the ways we can address this is by looking at what we are doing and asking ourselves, what are we not getting right? There are indeed a number of bottlenecks, I must say, that we have already been able to pull out and pick out that are an obstacle to us improving the lives of children in this country. And among them are both logistical issues, there are issues to do with attitude, behavior, some of our social norms as a country. So it's a multiplicity of issues that are resulting into what you're seeing in the country at the moment.
About 5 or 6 years ago, 2016, 2017, the country launched what we call the ECD, the Early Childhood Development Policy. And sometime in 2018, we also launched as a government, or as a country, what they call the National Sexuality Education Framework. And when you look at the framework, now the ECD was targeting children, I think,
0 to 5.
0 to 5. Now when you look at the sexuality framework, it was categorizing children 0 to 18, but in different categories.
Yes.
And they also have the bracket of 0 to 5 with and teaching them sexuality stuff and etc. Of course, it got some resistance, and it just sends you thinking, or shows that the government of the country is really trying to do quite a number of interventions onto the children. And the question is, how far with all these? We have the ECD 5, 6 years later, the sexuality framework another about 3, 4 years later. This is improving the welfare and the livelihoods of the children in this country.
Yes and no. Why? As a country, when you come to our legal and policy framework, we're up there. And it is important that you have these frameworks that allow then implementation to happen. So legislation, if you look at the laws, they are robust. If you look at the policies, in 2020, let me even add to what you said, we passed what we call the National Children's Policy. So 2020. So documental, if you look at the documents we have and the policies, many of them are actually quite comprehensive. Now the question is, implementation. So it is one thing for us to put this on paper. It's another thing for us to bring this to the ground. If you speak about, for example, the early childhood development and education policy, you know, one of the challenges is that you have a policy that is not backed by resources. For example,
good policy, not facilitated.
Not facilitated. Do you know that, interestingly, in Uganda, what we call early childhood education, which many times we refer to as that nursery stage, 0 to 5,
0 to 5,
is purely in the hands of the private sector? What does that mean? It means that the majority of the children don't actually access that education. But what does science tell us? Science tells us that that is the most important age.
Formative age.
Formative age. In the learning, in the growth and the development of this child. So we have a policy, and if you read the policy, my God, it speaks profoundly on what we need to do. But the reality is that no resources have been allocated, and so it's in the hand of the private sector and not necessarily very well regulated. So yeah, there's a gap.
So what do we need to do with that?
So
going forward as AfriChild now.
Yes. So one of the things we need to do is, and that is why we have to keep drumming up the evidence. We have to keep showing what is the cost of not investing in this levels of education. What is the cost to us as a country? Now, you know, when you look at growth and development of countries, different countries adopt different philosophies. So you will find that, for example, in Uganda, we believe very much in infrastructure development. And it is not wrong. Because if you want to know where a country is investing, you simply look at the budget. So the budget tells you where we are putting our money. And our reality is that a lot of our money is in infrastructure development. Not bad. However, we believe, especially as AfriChild, that the greatest investment we can make as a country is actually in human capital development. And in the people.
Social development.
Yes, and in the people. And in a country that has the majority of its citizens as children, 56% of Ugandans are children, it means, therefore, that if we want to really progress, we need to allocate the adequate resources to ensure the growth, the protection, the well-being of this child, so that this child is actually the one that is going to transform this country. The socio-political, economic development we are looking for, the Vision 2040, will actually come if we invest more in children. And we as the AfriChild Center are trying to make that case to the powers that be, that we can have all the infrastructure. But if the quality of our children, the quality of our population is not up there, then it is going to defeat the infrastructure that we are developing.
Our children placed rightly in the ministry where they belong, the Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development, or we think they are sandwiched among so many other priorities in there? Would you suggest a different setup or ministry where we can look at the children, appropriate for them independently, if we will build that, or we feel it's okay to have them under the Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development, where they have all the other things?
Well, that's a very good question, but let me answer it this way: that if I had the authority, if I purely had the authority, if I was the president of this country, my focus would be on children. Now, that said, going to the question you have asked, I think that lumping up children in the Ministry of Gender and Labour and Social Development has created a challenge. Why? Because if you go into the Ministry of Gender and Labour and Social Development, there are a number of issues.
And votes.
And then when you look at the Ministry of Gender, you have issues of youth, you have the issues of the elderly, you have the women,
social, the cultural,
yes, the cultural, the faith, and then the children,
the laborers, and the children.
Now go and look into the budget. First of all, the Ministry of Gender is the most underfunded. Secondly,
most underfunded with everybody in there.
Across the nation of Uganda, it's the most underfunded ministry. But that's not just the problem. The problem is that even in the ministry, the issues of children, the Department of Children and Youth is the most underfunded. Again. So it speaks really to, in my opinion, a bit of a need to rethink our priorities as a country. I haven't had the opportunity to visit countries like Israel. And one of the most interesting things is one of the reasons why Israel actually is one of the most innovative countries, is even Japan, is their investment in early childhood education and development. They invest to make sure that children are socially stimulated, mentally stimulated, and that innovativeness is created at a young age. We're lacking that here.
Okay, we have a problem with the children, but you also now realize that this very young country in sub-Saharan Africa has also got the youngest parents, youngest mothers. Now, it is on record, I think, the second youngest grandmother in the world is Ugandan from Butaleja. And you will find so many children who have given birth to children, and they're struggling to see how to manage going forward. Where is our future?
Well, I mean, those are the issues. We have, I think, the second highest rate of teenage pregnancy in Africa. And even before we had the COVID-19 pandemic, we had an issue. When COVID came, we tried to make noise and say, please be aware of what the cost of COVID might be. We might not have the number of people dying as in other countries, but the social cost. We have a teenage pregnancy crisis. So as you rightly said, we have so many young children who are mothers now.
And fathers.
And fathers. Unfortunately, we don't talk a lot about the fathers. We focus more on the mothers. But the reality is that, and we have not, by the way, provided adequate support to these young mothers. Yes, the Ministry of Education came out with guidelines, but if you go to see the implementation of these guidelines, when we went into the lockdown on March, I think 18th or March 22nd, 2020.
March 2020.
Yes.
March 2020.
2020. The president mentioned that 15 million children were going back home.
Children.
So we need to go and check Of the 15 million, how many have gone back? My rough estimate, based on the anecdotal information we have, is that almost half of these children have not gone back to school.
7 million.
Yes, and you have the majority being girls, right? Now, these are young people without support, so we are recycling a problem. And because there has not been a deliberate plan to reintegrate them in school, yes, there have been guidelines, but I'm talking about, and that's what I told you, we can come out with guidelines. That we are very fast at doing. But implementation, can we go to these schools and see what provisions have been made for these children to come back to school? But even those that are at home, we are going to have first of all, you know, these children are not biologically built to have children. So you're going to have a lot of death even because their bodies are not ready for this. But even the support system. So again, it goes back for me to the issue of priority. Can we make these 7 million children who have not gone back to school a priority? Why? Because if we don't, when we have a high level of crime in this country, we then should not be surprised. You saw what was happening just towards the end of lockdown. These children who were becoming a menace on the street, who were attacking, and it's because there is no support. And we need to address this. Because indeed, people talk about a time bomb, many times from a political perspective. But I think that indeed we have a political time bomb in the young people. Why? We haven't given them adequate attention.
Okay. Well, very important. Mr. Opobo, the ED of AfriChild Center. And now, just getting to what is happening currently is we've reopened schools for another term. During lockdown, of course, the demand was, please open the schools, open the schools, open the schools. We thought it was actually a good thing for the parents to stay at home with the children until we just discovered that the homes were actually not even safe. Now, the safe havens were actually in schools and not in homes. So we're struggling to get the children away from us to go back to school. When they get to school, of course, there's also violence meted against them. It happens to them in the homes. It happens to them in the schools. There are perpetrators who met this violence to the children, whatever they are. What needs to be done and how should we manage? Because homes don't seem to be safe, schools don't seem to be safe.
Yeah, fair, and that's an accurate observation. So we have, and the pandemic showed us huge levels of violence in homes.
In homes, yes.
Worse almost than schools. And now the children are back at school, but even before, we had an issue of violence against children in school. So the question is, what must we do? Again, I would like to go back to our legal framework. Now, we do have laws in this country. The problem is that these laws are not doing what they are supposed to do. So the law is supposed to do two things, in my opinion. It's supposed to deter would-be perpetrators, because I know if I do this, this is what is going to happen. Two, it's supposed to bring justice to those that have been abused.
The victims.
Our laws are failing to do both things. So what we really need to do is really to strengthen the justice system. They're not deterring, and they are not providing justice to the abused. Those two things. So what we need to do, because if we implement these laws to the letter, it will deter people. But people know that even if I abuse this child, I will get away with it. I will sexually abuse this child, I will be transferred to another school. I saw a clip just before I came on this show. It was a very disturbing. A mother, you know, she beat this child until the child almost lost consciousness. And this is the mother. Why don't we lock her up so that another mother will know that this kind of practice towards the child is unacceptable? So one of the areas where we are failing, and failing largely, is the implementation of the laws. The second is, as a community, as a people, Africans, we must change our mindset. We must understand that this violence we are meting out on children has far-reaching consequences. Now, one of the things that came out in the lockdown was a high spike in domestic violence. But what is the origin of the high level of domestic violence? We breed a culture of violence. So we teach children in a violent way. We treat them, when they become adults, all they know is violence. So when they go in homes, they're just repeating this cycle. We have to break the cycle. This mentality that the only way to discipline children is through violence is false. It has been tested from a research perspective. It shows that it does not give the result that we assume. In fact, I've always argued with people and told them and said, you know, if this thing was the one that works, then the Africans should be the most advanced, the most disciplined people.
If this thing works?
Violence against children, because we like to use it as an excuse for discipline. Then we should have been the most disciplined. But the results are showing otherwise. The reality is different. So we need to change our attitude and our mindset and adopt more positive ways of disciplining our children.
The schools themselves, because even in schools, there is violence against the children in every which way. And now there will be what you talked about, assaults or sexual harassment or whatever it is, but there is also a violence that is concealed or hidden under something called trying to punish or to reprimand or do all the things too. And they also become a problem that when you look at our rates of school dropouts, has also connotations too, with those some other issues. So what needs to be done, especially from an angle or where you are to dealing with the children? Yes.
So indeed, again, like you said, you see different perspectives and it's multifaceted. In the schools, as you rightly said, there's a very direct linkage between violence and the high school dropout rate. Now, one sad, for those who like statistics, one of the sad statistics that we have is that the dropout rate for primary school is actually about 68%. What does that mean? That for every 10 children that start P1, only about 4 finish. The 6 drop out. And why are they dropping out? The girls are dropping out because they are pregnant. The boys are dropping out because of physical violence. And we need to look and understand that this is a crisis. The problem for me is that we, as a country, we are not appreciating that this is a crisis. And that if you have only about 38% or 32% of your children finishing primary school education, you can't be talking about Vision 2040. There's just no linkage, because one of the drivers we believe for transformation is education. So if only 32% of our children are finishing primary, and by the transition to secondary school is worse, only 25% go to secondary school. Yes. So largely, so largely we have a largely uneducated population. And so the laws need to work. The school environment needs to be made safe. And this is also towards our teachers, but also to the students. And now, by the way, there's something that has even come up, which is very interesting, which is a whole technology issue. So you have violence from adults to children, you have violence from children to children, and now with the advent of technology, because what the pandemic did is it introduced us to gadgets.
It exposed us to technology.
Yes, and so you have now children exposed, and we are in an information age. But who is regulating what these children are watching? Who's regulating what these children are doing online? I can assure you, yesterday I saw a child, she's 16 years old, and I saw what she had posted on her account, and I was shattered.
At 16 years?
At 16 years. But the parent has no clue that this is what the daughter is putting out there. So the point I'm trying to make is that we really have to attack this issue as a crisis, address it as a priority, to protect the children and to secure the future. That's the real securing of the future.
There are interventions from every angle. For example, when you get back into, you talk about education, and of course, you know, when you talk about children, you take education. Government in 2019 launched what they call the National Teacher Policy. And of course, when you look at it, it's one way to make the teaching profession a better one. But the end result is to give us quality education, or to give our children quality education as an intervention. Now, for you, as the AfriChild Center, interventions like you have what I think they call the school
good
kit,
school toolkit.
The good school toolkit.
Yes.
How is that helping solve the problem? And is it whose is it?
Yes.
Who can access it? Who accesses it? Who uses it? And who does what with it?
Thank you, and that's a good question. So I would like to first of all mention that we are involved in partnership with Raising Voices to implement what we call the Good Schools Toolkit. innovators or originators of this kit is actually Raising Voices.
Okay.
And Raising Voices has actually shared this kit with the Ministry of Education. It has been embraced by the Ministry of Education. What the kit has done, or what it does, is it works with schools to create what they call a violence-free environment. Now, this has been tested, and it actually demonstrated in the schools where it was tested that it brought down violence by about 65%, meaning that it is actually something that worth investing into. So the idea is that we are doing continuously generating evidence in the schools where this is being implemented to make the case to the Ministry of Education that with the Good Schools Toolkit, if we're able to roll it out in the different schools, this is one of the best options we have to address the issue of violence. So it is a kit, it has different steps where teachers are trained, the non-teaching staff are trained, and even the children are trained. And it helps them move and change their thinking on around violence and promotes a safe school environment for children.
Hold it there. Let's go for a short break, and when we return, we continue the conversation, especially on the Good School Toolkit, because I think it's an intervention that you've brought up, and we just need to know how it can help make it better for our children to stay and to keep in schools, not to drop out for any particular reasons. We'll take a break and return shortly.
Live from UBC Studios in Kampala, this is Good Morning Uganda Extra.
Even with my grandson, a doctor at my side, I struggled to get the help I needed. But he saw something that day. He began to work day and night. He wouldn't quit, even when people said no. He wouldn't stop fighting. He knew something had to change, and his vision was bigger than anyone could imagine. He made it possible to receive quality medical services anywhere in Uganda by simply using a phone.
This is a story of a regular Ugandan just like you, who harnessed the power of technology to provide a solution for us. How about you tell us your story? UG needs more of you. To share your story, visit airtel.co.ug/UG needs more of you, or call or SMS 162. Airtel, the smartphone network.
Affordable packages, great entertainment,
sports, the local content, telenovela, the movies. There is something for everybody. Go TV, this is where great stories live.
Get the best entertainment for any budget. With GoTV, you will have great entertainment for as little as 13,000 Ugandan shillings per month. GoTV, great stories, Zidiwano. GoTV Uganda, love it.
Pick of the day on UBC. Was brought to you by...
Need to send money to a loved one but you don't have enough on your phone? Get away with MTN Momo Advance. Momo Advance tops up your Momo to complete your transactions. Dial *165*5*3# to apply. MTN Momo Advance is always available when you need it.
From UBC Studios in Kampala, this is Good Morning Uganda Extra.
Welcome back from the break, and thank you so much for keeping it with us. My name is Jagan Asemakola Zixok, and with me in studios is Mr. Timothy Opobo, the Executive Director of the Afri Child Center. Just right with me here today, we talk about issues that concern the child, and of course, what needs to be done next. Now, remember, we have just started another term, and we need to ensure that we keep our children in schools without them dropping out for whatsoever reason. You're talking to me about the Good School Toolkit. So what is it?
Yes, so the kit was introduced to primary schools and has been rolled out to quite a number of primary schools, and what we did from our end as Africhild was to do an evaluation to see, as I said, we want to see what works. And the evidence we generated through that evaluation is that it actually helps reduce violence in schools significantly. It is a process.
How does it do that?
So this is what happens. So it's a kit that has about 9 steps. And what really happens is that, first of all, the school must accept to go through these 9 steps.
Okay. Prima facie. Well,
Okay.
I'm now talking the law. What is the kit itself? You know, when you talk about a kit, we look at the first aid kit, we look at a tool kit, we look at a kit. So we expect something that has a bottle in there and the phone in here and the key and stuff like that. So what is this kit?
So the kit is actually something similar to what you just said. It's like a first aid box. It is actually a box that has different steps or trainings that a school goes through to try to change the mindset of the teachers, the non-teaching staff. So it's actually a training kit and has steps. So you go step 1, this is how we do it, this is what we do. So the school gets involved in being and doing what is in that kit, following those steps. And it involves engagement, it involves a lot of discussion and dialogue between the teachers, the children. It's to get people to the understanding that 1, violence is not necessary. 2, there are options that we can take. And then we collectively agree that we are going to try this out. And then we try it out. And it is, you see, change is not a spontaneous thing.
No, it doesn't happen.
Yeah, it's a process. And so this kit is actually a process that it takes the school through a process of trying to change the way they have been doing things, the way they've been engaging with children, and allow them to actually adopt new approaches. And where this has been done, as I said, we have seen positive results. We have now just introduced it to secondary schools because it was only in primary schools, and we are also trying to evaluate its efficacy. The Ministry of Education is aware of it. However, they haven't embraced it as a national strategy. And we are hoping that with the evidence we generate from the secondary schools, it becomes something that even the national curriculum adopts as an approach that schools can use to address violence.
National curriculum hasn't, Ministry of Education hasn't, so how are those using it?
So, no, they are using it with permission from the Ministry of Education. You see, and rightly so, the Ministry of Education is part of the implementation, but we have to, again, make a solid case before it becomes a national program. So that is what we are trying to do. We are trying to walk with them through this journey, get them to also understand it, get them to embrace it, and then hopefully it becomes part and parcel of.
How does a toolkit avert violence?
Well, first of all, it works on the mind.
Okay.
So when you look at violence and why violence is meted out, let's talk about physical violence. It's a mindset. You believe that the only way I can correct this child is to beat them. So what the tool does is to first of all let you understand that when you beat this child, yes, the child may respond in the short term, but there are long-term consequences of this beating. This child is going to learn that the only way to be corrected is to beat. The second, that the only way they shouldn't do what you wanted them to do is only once you beat them. So they don't actually learn why what you're telling them is wrong. So they begin to respond to a stimuli of being, it's like a dog. If you train a dog and say at this time is the time you eat,
you condition it.
You condition it. So what we do with violence is we condition children to respond to violence. So what the toolkit does is to actually decondition the mind to realize that there are alternatives. You can actually approach this case this way, and so it helps transform the mind. That's the key.
There are parents, your parents and my parents, those who took us to school the time you went to school, the time I went to school. One of the ways we were actually taught was we were caned in schools, we were beaten in schools, and we are what we are today because we went through that. Why do we think things have changed so suddenly?
So I disagree with you, first of all.
Your children and my children shouldn't be punished in
I
school.
first of all disagree with you.
Disagree?
Yes. I don't believe that you are what you are because you were beaten.
Partly.
because there are many people who were beaten who did not make it.
Partly.
So we cannot attribute.
We didn't bow out of school.
We cannot attribute where we
Beating,
are to purely beating, because
not purely beating.
Yes, because many people who were beaten did not make it. So that disqualifies that assertion. However, we know that we came from a background where where beating was the norm. And indeed, I keep saying that if it were the solution, then many of the issues we see today should not be there, right? Now, when you go to let me give you a very practical situation, reality in this country. Yes, we were beaten, and I'll give you. We were beaten when you need to go to class. They would ring the bell in my primary school, and we would stay playing. And then the teacher would come with a stick and start to beat. So what happened is we got conditioned that when the bell rings, you don't actually go. You wait for the guy to come with a stick. Then you go. What happens is that continued as we grew up, that they always had to be an image of fear to get you to do what you're doing. One of the challenges we have right now is this whole concept of African time. Why? Because we are now adults, no one is going to beat us, so what, we are always late. Why? We were conditioned to only being on time once there is something to scare us. That's just a simple reality. People don't realize that when we talk about African time, the background is the fact that there's no one to push you, so you are not motivated to be anywhere on time. That's it. That is why in offices today, if the boss is not there, people cannot work.
Exactly.
So this thing has its history there. We need to train children to be self-motivated, self-driven, and that does not require violence. We don't need to stimulate them. It requires, right from a young age, to let them understand, why is it important for us to start on time? Why is it important to be able to do my work without a supervisor?
Can't there be corrective punishment without being violent?
Exactly, and that's what we're talking about. So there is a concept that is within the Good Schools Toolkit that speaks about positive disciplining. So positive disciplining removes away the issue of fear and creates a motivation. In other words, let me give an example. I have children, by the way. I have 3 children, and I can confidently tell you on air that I don't beat my children, and I believe that my children are very disciplined, and I can assure you. Why? Because for me to correct them, one is to explain why I'm asking them not to do what I think they shouldn't do, because I think they should understand why. 2, the corrective measures I use are supposed to be more positive. So, for example, if my child does something that is wrong, I'll ask them to sit down and write for me an essay as to why what they have done is wrong. I'm helping them improve their writing skill. I'm also helping them reflect on, why did he say this thing is wrong? So, of course, it varies. The issues to do with age levels. So that's why the kit is there. So you're able to realize, what do I do with a child who is an adolescent? How do I deal with a child who is younger than an adolescent? And there are different options. But we need to look at corrective measures that build, that not tear down.
Okay.
So that when my son grows up and he's in his house, he will know that there's an alternative when there's a disagreement with his wife. He's not going to beat her. Why? Because for us who were beaten, once we have a problem, the only thing our brain has been taught is to beat. So then you have domestic violence. So that is it.
Okay, very important. Now, the Good School Toolkit here, is it a preserve of only schools, or the parents can also use it? Because there are parents whose responsibility and role is to simply pay school fees, buy uniform, buy books, and that's it. The rest it doesn't concern them. The day school going children, when they come home and they have assignments to work on, homeworks to work on, and all the things, the parents are not concerned at all, because they have paid school fees to teacher Opobo or teacher Semakola, and then it's their duty. Let them manage it that way. Does this help them? And where are such parents whose responsibility is limited to paying school fees, buying uniforms, and buying books?
Good question. And first of all, I want to say that the limitation with the kit is that it was designed purely for schools, and that's a limitation. But you bring an important, very important point, which is how can we actually engage parents? How can we help parents also be equipped and empowered to deal with children? I know, again, that from within the Ministry of Gender, that they have developed what they call parenting guidelines. But again, this is something that I think we can draw aspects from the kit that can be used to help in parenting. Right now it is limited to schools because the intention was to create a safe environment in schools. But you mentioned something I think that is critical, which is improving the home environment. And I think we need to see how can we pick aspects of it, because indeed there are issues there that parents can really learn that would help them improve on the home environment. So that is a gap I would like to point out.
That's very important. Post-COVID now, not post-COVID, but post-lockdown, because I can't say post-COVID as though there is no more COVID. COVID is here. The other day they were telling us they're finding a new variant, some Omicron something, so we're still with COVID here. But how are the children, you work with the children, how are they adopting to the new changes? How are they adopting to the new systems? Are they adopting to everything that is happening around us? Because to many of us, we've seen some bad days, but not as bad as COVID-19. The children could be seeing the first calamities in their lives forever. You know, they've not seen anything like that before. You work with them, and how are they adopting to the new times?
Yes. So it is both positive and negative, I would like to say. COVID-19 had, you read the headline, 14 million Ugandans having mental health challenges. And these mental health issues are not necessarily limited to adults. Even children have gone through mental distress. Why? Because of what they experienced during the pandemic. Many of them had never seen their parents fighting, had never seen their parents lacking, because you know what happened.
Staying at home without jobs.
Exactly, staying at home without jobs. So it has had a mental effect, negative mental effect. So many of them are going through stress and depression. Unfortunately, again, we have not addressed that issue with children. The other thing is that, as I said, that we were initiated into more usage of ICT during the pandemic. So children have now learned how to use these gadgets, phones, tablets, and all that. And I was at a parents' meeting on the weekend, and one of the issues that they raised, the problem the school raised, is that children are going with phones to school. But it's not just that, it is what they are doing with these phones. So there is a bigger risk right now that many children are now at risk of sexual abuse by pedophiles, because they can find them online. Children now have Facebook accounts, children have TikTok accounts, children have Twitter accounts, making them more vulnerable. And because there is no regulation, and many times even parents are busy doing what you said, we are giving them what they want, and then we say the school will sort out that matter. So there is also that emerging problem, and I think that the whole issue of online abuse is an emerging issue right now, and it's something that we need to curb early. That's why the Ministry of Education had the dilemma last term. 1 minute they tweeted out that they have allowed gadgets, and then recalled it because there was a reflection and realized this may not be right. And the minister was spot on, because he said we need to have a regulatory framework before we allow this. And he was right, because prematurely allowing it means you
just having phones and your children coming to class.
Yes, and it's so dangerous. It's so dangerous. So what is going to happen? What unfortunately is, you're going to see an increase in kidnappings, because more people can lure these children through online. You're going to see more sexual abuse of children. Why? Because again, they can be lured. And this is something I'd like to really urge parents out there. You might think that you're empowering your children with these gadgets, but if you have no rules and no regulation, you're actually putting them at risk.
How should the parents get involved in this whole system of education, etc. Because we put a lot of demands onto the government, and because government is supposed to do all the things for us, we put a lot of demand onto the government. Help us do this, help us do that, help us do this. It comes to even food, especially when you get into UPE schools, where the parent says, the government is educating my child, they should provide, they should do this, they should do that, and even pay for the teachers' fees or etc. Where should the parents be? How should they be engaged into the education of the children?
Again, I think, yeah. First of all, the government didn't give birth to these children. It was you and me. We are the parents. And I think that there was a misunderstanding, I think, in terms of communication, where the government may have created the impression that this,
everything
is ours.
Give birth to children,
and
give
I think
them to
that,
us,
I
and we'll
think
sort them out.
that communication, unfortunately, still, although there have been attempts to correct it, I think they need to drum that message down that fundamentally these children belong to homes and belong to parents. And yes, the government has a responsibility, but you as a parent are the first line of protection for your child. You are the first person with the responsibility towards this child. And I actually think we need to take it a notch higher. One of the biggest challenges when you look at the statistics in the police crime report is the issue of child neglect. Parents neglecting responsibility for their children. And there are legal implications. Again, I believe that if we tighten and make people responsible, you know that if I give birth to these children, I have the responsibility to look after them. And if I don't, there is a cost. I think that will help also control, because the whole thing is going out of control. This mentality that you can give birth to the children and somebody else out there is the one going to handle them. Even the teachers, we cannot put this pressure on the teachers. At the end of the day, when you are having when your child makes it, many times you don't even remember our teachers. But you want so I think we really need a mindset shift as parents. And there are two ways. One is through empowerment, through communication, through these talk shows we're having to educate parents. The other is by force, the law.
The other is by force.
Yes, to get parents who don't want to understand, to actually take up their responsibility, the law.
Okay, as AfriChild Center,
yes,
where do you see the future of this country, the future of children in this country in the next maybe 5 years,
yes,
10 years, or before we achieve the Vision 2040?
Now, I stand a very serious risk, Semakula, here, of sounding like a prophet of doom. And yet that's something I don't want to, again, sound like. But let me try to be modest and try to give a balanced view. And I'll say that in the next 5 years, unless, and that's the caveat, that unless we look at the issues concerning children as a priority, unless we allocate adequate resources required for the welfare, for the protection, for the well-being of children, the next 5 years, unfortunately, don't look bright for this country and for the children. And if we are going to achieve those targets, middle income status, Vision 2040, it is going to take a U-turn from the current trend of things in the country. So that's really what it looks like.
Where should we put our efforts now?
So let us invest. Let us move away from having early childhood development education just in the hands of the private sector. So meaning that those parents that cannot afford that education, children miss that. So I would like to say that, an appeal really to the government, that I think that we need to allocate resources to have more children between 0 to 5 years attending school. So that is one. Two, we need to strengthen the arm of justice in this country. We have good laws, we have good policies. Can we make them work? Can we go down to understand why are these laws not working? And when you go down to try to look into the issues, it is still an issue of resources. You have a family and child protection unit at a police station, but if you go there, it has no budget. So they don't have fuel to arrest a perpetrator, they don't have paper to record the case. Why? Because it's not seen as a priority. So we need to strengthen the system, the structures, for them to deliver for children.
How does it feel that Uganda as a country is a signatory to all these international protocols, declarations, everything that concerns the children in this world? We are part and parts of them. How does it feel that we belong to all this big community of all these legal frameworks, and we still are struggling this way?
So I see it very positively. First of all, I see it positive because it gives you, the opportunity to actually talk about these issues. It means that we can press the powers that be, because they signed. It's an obligation for this nation that we need to adhere to what we have signed to. So it is a positive in that respect. But of course, in terms of the progress, implementation, it's very frustrating. I think it's quite frustrating that although we sign and we are quick to sign, I think a signature without commitment is as good as no signature. So I think the commitment is demonstrated in action. It is. I keep telling somebody that if somebody apologizes to you in words and says sorry but continues to do what they were doing, then that is no form of apology. So I think these laws that we pass, these policies that we pass, they are meaningless to the child if they don't equate to a transformed life for a child.
Okay, very important. A final message to the viewers?
Well, our viewers out there, I just want to re-echo that we have one of the youngest populations in the world. Children, we like to say, are the future, but the future cannot be reached without addressing the present. So I want to appeal to parents, I want to appeal to teachers, I want to appeal to the children themselves, that let us work together. Let's try to ensure that we do what we are supposed to do to protect these young people, but to the government as well. I think let's make children a priority through allocation of resources. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Timothy Opobo, the Executive Director of AfriChild Center. Thank you so much for having allowed to join us here. And I think you need more ambassadors, more goodwill, friends, etc., to help you own the children in this country. It just feels very bad when you move out of town here and on the streets everywhere you see children in the morning as you're driving to come to work. You're driving your children to school. There are quite a number of children on the streets selling orbit, and the number is actually increasing every other day. Well, but it concerns all of us, and of course we need to do something about the future of our children and the generations to come hereafter. We'll stop the conversation here. Thanking you so much. My name is Jagenda Semakola, wishing all the best again. Good morning, blessings, and shalom.
Thank you.
Live from UBC Studios in Kampala, this is Good Morning Uganda Extra.